So welcome to Painting Pairs number 1, 2024. Thank you for coming. I'm very excited this year, as I always am, for Painting Pairs Art History and Technical Study, which is a research opportunity for graduate students enrolled in the Masters in History of Art, or the MA in Curating the Art Museum, and the PhD program in History of Art. It's supported by the Research Forum, the Courtauld Gallery, and the Department of Conservation. And in the program, selected students are given the opportunity to form a research partnership with future conservators from the postgraduate diploma or the Masters in the Conservation of Easel Paintings, which is the group this year, the Masters course. Each pairing explores the contribution of technical study and what it can make to art historical scholarship, but also vice versa, how art historical scholarship works with the technical information it can get when you look at a painting in an object-based way. So the work is carried out on a painting that's undergoing analysis or treatment in the Department of Conservation, and the paintings are drawn from private and public collections, including the Courtauld Gallery. The program is now in its 13th year, and we've got to give credit to Alex Bovey for thinking up the idea of Painting Pairs in the first place, and Leila Bondra for supporting it for all these years. Because the whole program's extracurricular, and the students don't get any brownie points towards their degrees for this. They do it as an extra thing, and I'm really pleased about that as well. And a special thanks also to Acacia Finbow and Grace Williams of the Research Forum for their support and brilliant organisation of the programme, and also Karen Sayre, curator, gallery curator, and Pippa Bausch, who worked really hard to source great pictures for the programme and also choose the people who participate in it. So this first presentation, the pairs will introduce themselves and the paintings they're working on, and in particular the questions that they've decided to investigate in the coming months. And they've done this together and very independently. And the research will culminate in a presentation on Friday, May the 24th. After each presentation we can take questions, the pairs will take questions and also introduce the following pairs. But the presentations will be in chronological order today, from older paintings to more modern paintings. And the first pair are Nitsan Band and Jessica Rea Brown, who are going to be talking about the bearded man and the falcon from the Courtauld Gallery. So, welcome the first pair.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I'm Jessica and I'm studying for an MA in Curating the Art Museum, and I have a background in History of Art at my undergrad.
Hi, my name is Nitsan Band. I too have my BA in Art History, and I'm currently in my second year in the MA of Conservation of Easel Painting here at the Courtauld. The two of us come from an art historical background and have branched out to paths that equally rely on such a basis. The comprehensive examination of paintings within the framework of this project, as well as in general, benefits from the collaborative nature of integration of methods and practices of research. Partnership across disciplines is essential throughout the research process, spanning from formulating the initial questions and hypotheses to drawing the conclusions about an artist's method and technique. Performing a technical examination of a painting in combination with art historical research could allow us to distinguish a connecting thread of style and painting technique.
We've tried to already introduce a collaborative element to our research, so we often read in the same room and we spend time in front of the painting together, which is particularly exciting for me as someone who's not a conservator to spend so much time with an object that I'm writing on. Just some quick introductory things about the content and meaning of the painting, as well as the materiality. This painting is attributed to a Venetian painter, Lazzaro Bastiani, probably around 1500, and it shows a quarter-length portrait of a bearded man. And what's most notable about him is that he's holding a falcon in his hand and wearing a falcon as well.
The painting is of oil medium, currently untested, on canvas support. It is currently removed from its frame for the sake of technical examination. The painting's auxiliary support is a stretcher with 1 horizontal cross members and 8 creases present. The paint layer appears to have suffered widespread damages and losses, and therefore is heavily overpainted as part of previous restoration works. Old restoration campaigns are noticeable upon close inspection, mainly in the background and on the black garment the sitter is wearing. These previous interventions are, however, less apparent in normal lighting conditions. The edges of the painting reveal signs of abrasions and old scuffing that have been toned by restorers in the past. Despite being historically damaged with abrasions and likely flaking of the painting is currently stable and displays satisfactory planar alignment, with no visible evidence of areas of raised paint or recent losses. The painting was lined at least once in the past, and the lining canvas appears to be well adhered and taut and free of distortions. From observation under UV fluorescence, the varnish layer is pronounced and the more recent retouchings are made visible. Its latest intervention was its examination and preparation for a loan in 2017, when the gallery's chief conservator retouched specific areas using gambling colors and MS2A varnish. The aged varnish had discolored and yellowed, and it is currently distorting the intended chromatic relationship of the composition. As said, from initial visual inspection alone, it is made clear that the painting had undergone multiple treatments in the past. This coincides with correspondence found in the gallery's curatorial file, where more than one occasion of restoration treatments is referred to, as can be seen in this letter between Leo Ferram and Dr. Van Marl, where they mentioned a treatment for both the paint, but mainly we will focus on the transfer from panel to canvas. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Oh, not yet. Sorry. One of our research aims is to understand the physical history of the painting. From the curatorial file, we've learned of the possibility of a transfer treatment the painting went through, and we will attempt to find its physical and visual evidence. The transfer technique involves removing the picture's support, retaining only the paint or paint and ground layers, and reattaching it to a new support. Here we can see a case study, one of many case studies of such treatment. This one is from the National Gallery. It's the Madonna and Child by Raphael from around 1509 till 1511. According to Jill Duncanton's study of the painting, we learned that in the second half of the 18th century, this painting underwent a transfer from panel to canvas, a procedure that originated in Italy and gained popularity in 18th century France. This method was believed to be a safeguard for paintings from deterioration caused by unstable wooden support. The transfer consequences include, in this case, large missing areas of the original paint. During the 19th century, canvas became the preferred support for panel paintings, although early criticism of this method had already emerged. By 1834, the transfer of panel paintings to canvas was recognized as challenging and hazardous procedure. Many historical canvas transfers necessitate additional conservation treatment, particularly those executed improperly. A small error in an intricate procedure can irreversibly damage the paint layer. Due to its invasive nature and removal of original material, this technique is considered today as a very last resort, if any. If the transfer that is mentioned in the curatorial file had indeed happened, this information would aid us not only with obtaining greater knowledge about the physical history of the painting, but also possibly identifying the source of existing damage to the painting and paint layer, and by doing so, aiding the success of any future treatment that might be undertaken. This is one of the original purposes for which this painting arrived at the Courtauld.
So our primary research at the moment has primarily been with the curatorial file, because we're lucky that our painting is the only one in this collection of pairs. It's actually in the Courtauld collection. We wanted to highlight this particular telegram because we hear some laugh from the audience, and it was quite a fun reference to the attribution and some of the questions we have. They refer to it as a so-called carpaccio, or almost complete fake. So whoever wrote this was not particularly chuffed with the way that the painting was created. So I suppose the carpaccio issue becomes central. We know that this is part of Lee's bequest, Viscount Lee Fareham, and his bequest to the Courtauld. He purchased the painting in 1935. He was a bit of a savvy businessman, and so he managed to, in a way, negotiate the price down by arguing that it was instead by an unknown master rather than by Carpaccio. And actually the man who was he was the kind of broker for the deal, Dr. Van Maal, he was the one to argue that it might be a Carpaccio, and we can speculate as to whether this is that he was going to take cut from the sale of the painting and that he maybe wanted to inflate its importance, but we don't know. And so we're really keeping the question of attribution quite open in our study. The earliest known provenance of the painting is that it was held at the Palazzo Costabili in Ferrara, owned there by Marchese Giovanni Battista Costabili, who was born in 1756, and he was an important general in Napoleon's army, and by 1850s his fortune isn't going so well and he starts selling off a lot of these, or in 1850, sorry, the Palazzo Costabili starts selling off some of these paintings, and we next meet it in 1907 in a sale at the Courtauld Gallery in Paris, and then it's bought by another Brazilian dealer. Its place in Ferrara is interesting because it places it within northern Italy, but we came across another correspondence in the file where one of Lee's close friends, Kenneth Clark, who was then director of the National Gallery, he sees the painting and says that really he thinks that it's not to do with Italy or Carpaccio at all, but it might in fact be from Northern Europe, and he favours a Swiss or a German origin. So we have some big names floating around, and we're kind of interested then in this relationship between the Northern Renaissance and the Venetian Renaissance in this period, and we'd like to look more into this kind of fluidity of boundaries, whether in workshops or with painters travelling between both locations.
So yes, this is the overview of our main aims of research. As you've heard about attribution, another area that could complement that is questions of materiality. So implementing various technical analysis methods will contribute to the identification of the original materials of the painting, possibly authentication of the artwork and the examination of issues that the painting may present. Identifying the original unaltered parts of the painting is crucial and often complex due to the frequent history of cleaning, restorations, and alterations to this painting. To do so, certain methods will be employed, such as X-radiography to study the support, changes in composition, and the option of a transfer process, infrared reflectography for identification and study of the underdrawing, plan composition, or possible pentimenti, and samples will be taken from the painting for cross-section analysis to enable a view of the layer structure, painting techniques, as well as the elemental analysis to inform us of materials used for the production of this painting.
And we will complement some of that technical research with primary and secondary sources. The primary text that we'll be looking at will be the Cennino Cennini's Artistic Handbook, which provides a really interesting insight into workshop practices and pigment usages in the period. As well as obviously the work of Giorgio Vasari, who's a really important source in understanding the networks of painters in this period. Interestingly, just from a bit of research, Vasari refers to two lives for one, what we think is one painter, Lazzaro Bastiani, and separates them into two brothers, Lazzaro and Sebastiano, these brothers of Carpaccio. So it already gives us a little insight into who might have painted this. We'll move on now to some of our more, this one. We want to do some comparative analysis to other Lazzaro Bastiani paintings.
So for the attribution of the painting and assigning it to a certain school, scientific research would allow us to establish certain parameters of materials used for the making of bearded men with falcon. We would therefore be conducting comparative research for materials and techniques, in addition to formalistic evaluation, between the bearded man with falcon and other works by Bastiani and his contemporaries, as we can see here and in the next slide.
Again, we're interested then in the potential symbolic meanings and allegorical purposes behind this painting. In this work by Carpaccio, the figure shown in detail on the left is holding a falcon, and this is maybe Carpaccio's most famous work in the St. Ursula cycle, so we're interested in tracing where this motif is. It's quite striking really to even paint the falcon, and so we're lucky in that there are limited examples of this type of work, and so it can help us to see it, but we'll be taking quite like a cross-European approach because it was an activity that was favoured really by the noble classes, whether in Northern Europe or in Italy in the period. And this is just a kind of illustration of our notion of networks that guides our research and kind of taking a broader approach to potential attribution. Part of the research that we would really be interested in focusing on is to do with fashion and self-fashioning in the period. We're interested in doing some comparative research with other portrait paintings that show noblemen wearing clothing like this. These are some detailed photographs that Nitzan took, which really allow us to see in detail some of these really quite fabulous fashion details, like this plumed feather hat. There's a hat stamp on it, which we would like to investigate further. These cuffs on his sleeves, and from close analysis we were also able to see, which is difficult to see from the main image on previous slides, that you might have a sword and a dagger on each side attached to a belt. And it was quite common, I think, for noblemen to wear hunting or kind of military accessories in a way, and so we're quite interested in what this tells us about who our sitter might be. Did he commission the painting? Was he a merchant? Previous Courtauld labels, which we found in the curatorial file, also suggest the De La Rovere family as a potential family he was connected to because of the detail of this oak leaf in the background, as well as also suggesting further family ties. In one label that's in our curatorial file, there's speculation that the tree, which has these really odd branches that look like they've been cut off, might be something to do with a family tree and references to dead family members. So the file has given us a lot of little areas that we'd like to follow. Yeah.
One of them, as was instructed in 1935, the next steps of our study will involve having the condition of the painting thoroughly and scientifically examined at the laboratory of the Courtauld Institute, including research of the original materials and restoration campaigns, as well as the identification and analysis of visual traces resulting from physical manipulation of painting materials and what they constitute of. These will be combined with formalistic, stylistic, and archival research of provenance and art history to allow a better and holistic understanding of this portrait and what can be learned from it. Achieving a genuine comprehension of a painting's history requires a broad and multidisciplinary collaboration between our two fields.
Thank you so much for listening, and let us know if you have any questions. Yes.
So I was really interested in what you were saying about the possibility of it being a transfer, and you said that often it was either it would go down to the paint or the paint in the ground.
Yes.
I was just wondering whether your one you could tell if it was just down to the paint or if there was still ground present.
Well, we'll be looking into generally evidence for a transfer at all. Currently, from my research so far, we can come up with two avenues to look into that. One would be the X-ray, if there are any traces or signs of wood grain or joints. The other one would be from taking a cross-section, where it's unlikely that we will see any wood residues, but perhaps the priming and the ground could indicate some sort of different process that was involved. Thank you.
Yeah, up there. Did I see a hand? No. Okay. In that case, we'll move on to our next pair. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Victoria Ward, and I'm the conservation student. I'm a second year on the MA program of Conservation of Easel Paintings.
And my name is Tiffany Foster, and I am the MA in History of Art student participating in this research study. So today we will be presenting our initial thoughts on a mystery object, a small panel depicting a birth scene. We received our painting in early November and realised very quickly that it's both unusual and an interesting piece. The panel is privately owned and arrived with little provenance and an uncertain artistic attribution. It was purchased last March at Sloane Street auctions and catalogued as an aristocratic birth scene. The painting is an oil on a single board, oil being untested. The panel portrays the birth scene of a child to a mother in white robes. encircled by 5 midwives, one in the background holding a warming pan, likewise attired in white. The gender of the child remains concealed by its leg. The mother, seated in a chair, has her weakened form supported by the grip of a midwife, her expression reflecting exhaustion. In the foreground, figures are brightly coloured, defined by bold black outlines and their clothing and silhouettes. Transitioning towards the background, objects become darker and hazier than this unassuming interior featuring wooden ceiling beams. The ambiguity of the scene adds to the mystery of this panel. Is this a Christian depiction of the birth of the Virgin and her mother, Saint Anne, or does it function as a genre painting, capturing a moment from everyday life? Our subsequent discussion will delve into the research aims and methods designed for this project, and our initial findings based on visual examination.
Moving forward with our research objectives and methodologies, we've carefully considered the insights provided by the panel owner and as well as the auction listing given to us initially about the painting. We've expanded on these key themes and have, based on our preliminary research, in essence, our goals pinpoint the completion date and origin of the panel, unveiling the subject matter of the painting, and understanding the functional purpose of the piece, all of which we'll delve into in the upcoming slides. Regarding our research methods, we aim to substantiate each point with a blend of art historical and conservation-based evidence. We propose employing iconographic and stylistic analyses, incorporating primary, secondary, and comparative research, and conducting a technical examination of the material, technique, and preparation of the panel, employing both invasive and non-invasive methods. Techniques will include pigment analysis, cross-sectional analyses through the microscopy and spectroscopy, as well as technical imaging. Additionally, our team is tasked with the conservation of piece, so specifically Victoria. This will encompass comprehensive documentation and condition reporting, aside treatments to the panel and painting, such as surface cleaning and the removal of the yellowing varnish, and retouching, all supported by an establishment of overpainting campaigns and a detailed material history of the object. Approaching the panel from an art historical perspective, it's crucial to first consider the information which was provided to us upon receiving it. The auction catalog described the piece as a quote-unquote aristocratic midwifery scene and proposed that it dated to the 17th century and that it was Northern European in origin. However, we anticipate to determine the exact locality and age of the piece, as speculation from the current owner suggests that the panel's origin may be from the southern Netherlands specifically and dates to the 16th century, and possibly depicting, rather than a secular birth scene, a depiction of the birth of the Virgin Mary. Considering this background information and our research goals, we will explore 3 major points from an art historical standpoint. Firstly, a stylistic analysis will be conducted to determine the date and location, supported by the technical analyses done by Victoria's conservational analysis. Notably, the painting displays a unique blend of Northern and Italian. We're thinking specifically Florentine based on the headdresses seen here in these examples, influences, evident Northern by the painting style of the faces, and again, Florentine in the style of the headdresses. A visual analysis of both the birth scene panel and similar works from Italy and Northern Europe will further support our determination of the region. This analysis is integral to my second research point. Is this painting sacred or secular? The subject matter remains ambiguous, with elements typical of birth scenes and secular birth scenes. Visual cues combined with references from primary and secondary research will unravel this ambiguity, helping us discern whether the painting itself is in fact sacred or secular. If it is a sacred scene, potentially identifying the baby as the Virgin Mary, if deemed Northern, or if Florentine St. John, that will determine exactly who the figures in the scene are surrounding our central person. If it leans towards a secular portrayal, then a secondary function of the scene would indicate that the panel is actually, in fact, 17th century, as such genre paintings were relatively uncommon during the traditionally perceived time of creation, which would have been the 16th century. A comparative analysis of the birth scene alongside similar imagery from both northern and Italian regions, spanning from the mid-16th to 17th centuries, promises to yield invaluable insights for our research. This examination will shed light on key aspects such as iconography, attire, and painting style and technique. An example of comparisons will include works such as shown on screen. So this one here is Jan de Beer's The Birth of the Virgin. This is an example of a sacred scene which we plan to use for comparison. Or the scene here, which is by Jan Steen, celebrating the birth, which is an example of such secular scenes. And as such, we will encompass, again, both these in comparison. Once we have successfully established the date and location of our panel, we can seamlessly transition onto our third research point, which is deciding what the function of this painting is. Leveraging our newfound knowledge, we aim to ascertain the function of the piece. Currently, the purpose of the painting remains unclear, whether it was intended as a standalone object or as part of a predella. Determining the date and location is crucial in deciphering the function, as regional practices during the time will determine and provide valuable context for understanding the piece's intended role within its cultural environment.
So moving on to the characteristics of the panel and the woodworking features. This small oil painting on a panel consists of a single board of oak, as previously mentioned, measuring 25 centimetres by 19.7 centimetres. In general, oak was the most common substrate used for panel making in the Low Countries, northern Germany, and the Rhineland around Cologne. The oak favoured as a support by the painters of the northern school was, however, not always of local origin. Dendrochronological studies have traced the enormous exportation of oak from the Baltic region to the Hanseatic League. This board has a straight horizontal grain with the tree rings positioned at a slanted angle, so you can see in the top right image, possibly off radial. The panel's smooth edges are beveled by a plane at the four sides. Beveling of the edges was carried out to facilitate easier mounting within a frame, securing it with either wedges or iron nails, as we can see on the schematic on the bottom right. Longitudinal medullary rays, which you can see here, I've highlighted, they are these dark streaks that follow the grain direction of the oak panel are visible. Medullary rays are common in oak and are often visible on the radial surface and are particularly prominent in certain cuts of wood, such as a quarter sawn oak. This would suggest that we have a higher quality panel. It's also possible that the 4 vertical gouge marks could have been made by a timber tradesman or made as a sort of quality mark for wood stock, although this is very much just a hypothetical. There is an example of this, so on the bottom of the screen we can see a late 16th century Dutch example where gouge marks were made by Baltic lumberjacks. Moving on to the tool marks, breaking light images show smooth tool marks thinning the back of the panel. Other examples, so bottom right, we've got a Dutch early 16th century and a mid 17th century panels, and then on the top there's 17th century panel which had dendro and lattice done that was pinned to the Polish Baltic region and also 17th century. Show smooth beveled edges and similar planing marks. The two on the bottom right show local planing. The tool that was used was probably a scrub plane, and we can see like this is the modern version of that tool. It's got a rounded convex edge and it produces characteristic shavings. Considering the similarities between our panel and these paintings, which are all genre paintings, it is possible that the panel is pretty much in its finished format and not part of a larger altarpiece. Overall, the characteristics on the back of the panel and woodworking features are quite consistent with panel making techniques in northern countries from the 16th and 17th centuries. Technical examination of the panel's preparation for painting will provide additional insights into its potential date and origin. Moving on to the condition and potential conservation treatment. The front of the panel is in poor condition and the paint layers are very compromised. There are numerous areas of losses at the paint layer and ground interface and complete losses exposing the wooden support. There are 2 small splits in the bottom right and left corners of the panel which are moving and will need to be repaired. The varnish appears yellowed, and we can see tentative cleaning tests. We don't know why they were done or when they were carried out. In the white drapery and in the blue in the river in the background, show that the yellow varnish has fundamentally changed the appearance of the scene of the panel. Varnish removal tests will be carried out to see if it is safe to remove the varnish layers. The upper paint layers are also in poor condition. Passages show an abraded top layer of paint, which is thicker and more embodied, as you can see in the micrograph on the bottom right, and several underlying passages of under-modelling that show thin, translucent glazes. So this particular example, the bottom right, shows an abraded area around the drapery, revealing what appears to be pink robes underneath. Carrying out cross-section analysis alongside technical imaging will provide a clearer understanding of the paint layer structure and possible underlying composition. Raking light images show there are indentations in the wood surface. These are likely losses that have since been overpainted. So part of our examination will be to establish what is original and unoriginal material and to potentially map out the overpaint campaigns. There are also some unusual things about this panel that add further mystery to its state and function. So a very straight 8 centimetre horizontal line at the bottom, you can see quite clean in raking light, initially appeared as a wood split. Micrographs actually show it's not a split, but a score through the paint layers, as you can see on the top right, with associating flaking paint surrounding it. Was this an intentional incision into the panel to make it look like a split? There are also drying or shrinkage cracks, as you can see in the micrographs on the bottom, primarily due to the internal stress actuated by, for example, the evaporation of solvent. They occur while the paint, even though is dry, is still soft enough to be subject to plastic deformation. The images show the ruptures are in the top layer of paint. The micrograph on the bottom left shows that the yellow layer beneath is uncracked. What's unusual is that about these drying cracks is that they also appear in the white paint passages where the pigment volume concentration would be higher and the paint film more durable, as we can see in that micrograph. Investigation into reasons for this shrinkage would be useful, as quick drying mediums like oleoresinous or bituminous oil paints could have been used. So, in conclusion, as we navigate through this investigation, our focus on the panel's history remains paramount. With an open mind, we explore various avenues for its potential date, location, and function. The intriguing possibilities surrounding these aspects make the panel all the more curious and drive our commitment to unraveling the mysteries of this interesting object. Thank you.
Were there any questions? Yes.
Yes, sorry, I didn't quite catch. How did this painting came into your hands?
So the painting is privately owned
Yes.
by someone who bought it at an auction last March
Yes.
in an auction house, and he thinks it could be Southern Netherlands 50-30 Baltic oak. We just had a feeling that it was that.
Hang on, do you mean why is it with us at all?
Yes.
Okay.
And how did it come?
So
Did
to
the owner
explain-
just ring the Courtauld and ask
Yeah,
for
to explain, I'm one of the teachers on the
Right.
course, so we work on paintings from all sorts of places. So we bring paintings in, source paintings for our students to work on as part of that.
Yes. So it was just someone who knew
Through me.
it through you, right? Okay. I've got this painting, can you help me? And that'd be good material for the students,
Exactly.
right? Okay. Thank you.
Could I just ask a little bit more about the background of the painting? Because there's the bird scene at the front, there seems to be a set table, and then a sort of an object at the back. Can you explain to us what's happening?
Yeah, so there are a few elements going on. The maid at the back is holding sort of a heating pan that's commonly used. It's like a very sort of antique birthing tool used to kind of warm up hot water.
In our investigations, as we delve further into the imagery and do more visual analysis on this painting and comparisons with other examples, we will be looking into sources which kind of indicate to us or give us a better idea as to what traditionally would have been in the room during the occasion of a birth. And so that will reveal to us in more depth exactly what these objects are, given as this is sort of a preliminary meeting. We haven't researched incredibly in depth. We have some indication as to what the objects in the hands of the women are, but not so much the objects on the table, and this also kind of spans from the fact that it's a little difficult to see. So as we move forward and we do some cleaning on the painting and we do more of that consultation with our primary and secondary sources and those comparisons, that is something we'll consider in our final research.
Just to add, there is, you can see, because there's been a cleaning test on the left of the image, it's showing kind of the outside world. There are some trees, there's a fence, and there's a river as well. So that is visible in its current state still.
Yes.
Yes?
The painting is clearly quite badly damaged and overpainted. How radical are you allowed to be with your conservation? Have you been given permission to do anything you wish, or have you got to hold back and consider how radical you can be?
So yes, the painting is in a very worn, damaged state. So any steps that I would take would have to be carefully tested to see even if it's safe to remove the varnish, because the varnish could be holding together, layers and layers of overpaint. And therefore I could potentially remove that as well. So it would just be a matter of being very careful with my steps. But I think the goals would be hopefully to remove this yellow varnish for aesthetic reasons, to have a much clearer image, and to do some repairs on some of the splits that are actually moving, and then to retouch and fill some of the losses as well that are disturbing the image. Yes?
Can I ask, what is that prominent foreground figure doing? I mean, what is she sitting on for a start? Tell us what that is. And also, what is she actually holding in her hands?
We've been asking ourselves the exact same question. We have looked at several examples and looked at several articles, and we have not found much about this basket yet, so that is to be determined. However, preliminary research suggests that the scroll that she has in her hands is perhaps a ledger or a record of births which have come before. It was tradition during this time that there was sort of a reading or a remembrance of the births that the midwives had performed before. It was a symbol of good luck and fortune to come, and so we are thus far assuming that that is a document which has the names of babies prior.
And is she the only character with her breasts exposed? I mean, could she be the wet nurse or something?
It's a possibility, yes. That is something we have discussed a little bit thus far. There is a lot of suggestive sort of theme going on here, which plays into our argument of, is this a sacred theme? Because typically when we think of those themes that are religious, we think of modesty. But yes, as far as we have been able to see up close, this is the only woman with her breasts out. However, there is this woman who is sort of bent over on the right here next to the woman in the center, who is just posed very suggestively, and a lot of, there is also this woman right above the woman with her breasts out who has the very low cut blouse, and so that is something else we'll be exploring in our research. Are there any other?
Yes.
Yes.
I wonder about the role she's holding. I think I read it as that's about swaddle. Is it fabric? Is it definitely paper?
It's unclear.
Okay, yeah, because it's difficult to see. It is intriguing, but I imagine the next step would be to swaddle the baby and feed it. So I sort of felt that's what that character was doing. So yeah, we haven't got enough comparisons yet, have we?
No, not yet. And like I said, there is still research to be done, especially in regards to what typically would have been in the room at the time, and also I think a determination of exactly who the baby is. Once we decide whether or not this is a religious theme, will help determine what all these objects are as well.
Can I develop the question that was asked just over here about your authority, the extent of your authority to undertake invasive research? Do you have to go back to the owner on each occasion, or has he given you blanket authority to do whatever you think is necessary?
So the owner has given me permission to take samples, which is an invasive technique, and he's okay with that. And I've given him rationale that samples would allow me to look at the paint structure, to understand, the panel preparation techniques, which could help determine if it's northern or more southern European. So he's fully on board with that.
Yes?
Sorry, can I just chip in again and add? That might be helpful just to explain that we work with the owners of the paintings, so we keep them up to date and we discuss with them their expectations. So it's not about just handing something over.
There's a continuing dialogue.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I'm curious about this a split or incision in the panel. About what makes you think that it's not just a split, and if it isn't, if it was, what was the cause behind it, or why you think it's distinct from the other splits?
So at a first glance, I did think it was a split, but it doesn't fully go through the wood. And the micrograph shows that the incision only kind of cuts through the paint layers, doesn't actually penetrate through the wood. So if it would be a split, you'd see it go right through the wood. It's also very stable, it doesn't move, it's not moving around the split. And because of the incision, there's paint flaking on either side because of this incision. So it is really unusual, and could it be intentional? Someone scored in to make it look like a split, or is it just damage? Yes.
I'm just wondering, when you look at it under the microscope, when you say incision and it's with intent and purpose, do you see any of the edges going inwards, outwards? Like, are those the evidence that you accept this?
I think with the idea of it being intentional, the only thing that kind of would point to that is it's so straight, it's really linear.
Where is I'm not.
Yeah, so if you can see, if you can see
Kind of
the mouse here, it's along this bottom edge of the panel.
So the microscope just allowed me to see which layers it's actually cutting through, and how it's affecting the paint around it. But if it's intentional or not is a bit harder to determine. But it is a very straight cut, so yeah. Yes.
If it was intentional, have you any theories why?
Well, there are a few things that just don't really quite match up on the surface of the panel. So that incision, the cut, also some of the drying cracks in areas that should be really stable, like some of the whites that could contain material that was perhaps later added on, that like bituminous or resinous. And also the fact that we're seeing signs of layers underneath the original layer that could be another composition. So possibly this may have been a panel that was reworked, because the back is very convincing from what I showed, it being oak and it having the beveled edges. So we're keeping a really open mind, and I think analysis will help us get more sort of pinpoint. Yeah. I think we should, yes.
I've just got one question about the function. You made a tentative suggestion about it being a predella panel, but how does that beveled edge fit with that idea?
The idea of it being a predella was brought up to us by the owner of the piece, so he's actually the person who has asked us to look into that function, mostly because of the size of the piece. So it's quite small. It's only about this large, and so I think that because, first of all, of the subject matter and the size of the piece is perhaps why he was supposing that it could have been part of a predella. Typically, scenes like this are not standalone pieces. They would have been supplementary, especially if it is a religious scene, as we're speculating to a larger altarpiece or a larger piece in general. So those two factors together, from the historical standpoint, combined to suggest that it could have been a predella piece. But the beveled edges and the fact that we have nothing else to combine with this piece makes us think that perhaps, especially with the indication that it might be northern, it could be a standalone piece. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Bianca Alfahal and I am in the MA History of Art program.
Hi, my name is Sakina Montanaro and I am the conservation student assigned to this portrait. So, portrait of the lady comes to us from Parham House in West Sussex. The sitter is currently identified as Elizabeth Verney. who became Elizabeth Palmer and first mistress of the house after marrying William Palmer. The painting is currently dated to the 1580s. Parham collection is built on the accumulation of paintings by the families who had lived there from 1577 to 1922, as well as many other pictures chosen for their connection to those already hanging on the walls by the Pearson family, who purchased Parham in 1922. The estate now belongs to a charitable trust, and Lady Emma Barnard and her family, great niece to Veronica Tryon, the Pearson's daughter. A portrait of the lady is by an unknown artist, but is currently attributed to William Sagar in a document dating back to 1969 in the Parham archives. The earliest mention of the painting comes from the house inventory from 1794. It is an oil painting believed to be on an oak panel consisting of 3 boards oriented vertically. The painting has come to the Courtauld for Painting Pair's project due to renewed interest in the work after a recent article published in the Burlington magazine identified a possibly related portrait. However, interest in this portrait is not new, as the identity of the sitter in the portrait has long been debated by various scholars, with letters dating back to 1929 from the Parham archives showing uncertainty in definitively identifying the sitter as Elizabeth Palmer.
Looking at the painting for what it contains, we find a high-class Tudor woman. She wears pearls, all of which at the time would have been natural, and diamonds in the details of her headdress. She's extremely pale, so pale that the artist has included quite a prominent blue vein on her forehead. And this tells us that she is someone who has the luxury of spending her time at ease inside and was wealthy enough to display it on her clothes.
When looking at the portrait, you may notice that the lady is positioned to the far left of the composition. While in some cases this could mean that there have been alterations to the size of the panel made in its past, the painting shows no sign of having been cut down, as there is still beveling along the corresponding edge, which we can see here. I'm pointing to the edge there. So this off-center positioning could, however, identify this painting as part of a pair, with both sitters turned towards each other and slightly brought closer together. On the back, it is possible to see 2 separate labels. The first writes in a black ink with hand-drawn floral designs around the capital letters E and P. Eleanor Palmer, daughter of the first Lord Paget of Beaudesert, sister to Charles Paget of Beaudesert, and wife of William Palmer of Parham. The name Eleanor is likely a mistake made by the writers of the inscription. The Parham House archives contain a suite of records identifying the woman named Elizabeth, not Eleanor Palmer, as the wife of William Palmer. The mistake was noticed and rectified by members of the house in the 20th century, leading to the common identification of the sitter as Elizabeth Palmer. The second label is constructed of 3 fragments of a letter by Jean Seigneur. It is handwritten in black ink and says 3 Russell Court, October 24th, 1836, lady, which appears to be Eleanor Palmer by the inscription on the back of the picture frame, to have been of the court of Queen Elizabeth by her fondness for emblematic devices, for in addition to the pansy or heart ease which she holds in her hand. Her dress is covered with columns, her ruff with serpents, and her muff with flames and darts. John Seigneur. The label once again mislabels the sitter as Eleanor rather than Elizabeth Palmer. So as you may have noticed, these labels have been scribbled out since their adhesion to the back of the panel. While the letter fragments are dated to 1836, it is possible to say that they were adhered to the board after the chalk inscriptions were added. Looking at the back in its entirety, the number 36 is written in very large numbers. There is also another illegible chalk inscription below the top label. Since being adhered to the panel, the labels have darkened significantly due to the acidity of the wood. However, they have retained some of their lightness in the path of the chalk inscription. This can be explained by the basic barrier of chalk creating a barrier between the acidity of the wood and the paper. Archival documents at Parham House indicate that the portrait sitter has long been associated with Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth Palmer was not only part of the Queen's court, but was her goddaughter, and the archives indicate that the identity of the sitter has hinged in past on a supposed visit the Queen had made to the estate. Parham House also owns a portrait long believed to have been a portrait of the Queen, portrait of a lady of rank, which we see on the right here, Since 1929, it's been recognized that the lady of rank is also most certainly not queen. However, both this portrait and portrait of a lady are still hung together in the Great Hall of the House due to the perceived goddaughter-godmother relationship of the two. So here's a picture that Bianca took when she visited the house. We can see the portrait of Lady of Rank and the blank space where our portrait would have happened, which we now have.
We suspect that the labels on the back of the portrait and identification of the portrait as Eleanor/Elizabeth Palmer are incorrect. Our evidence for this is an article published only last year in the Burlington magazine, written by Elise Effman Clifford, the head of paintings conservation at the Fine Arts Museum in San Francisco. Clifford's article examines a portrait now in San Francisco of a Tudor woman of the same period, which you can see here on the left. There are immediate and obvious similarities between the San Francisco portrait and Parham's portrait of a lady. The faces of the two portraits are almost exactly the same in places, leading us to question the relationship between the two.
So when faced with very similar paintings such as these, it's helpful to conduct further technical imaging to see whether there is an underdrawing stage and changes in the planning of the final composition. Changes within the initial planning of a painting can help identify it as the original, since subsequent copies will be doing just that, copying from this original. So because of the generosity of the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco in sharing their information, we have access to the technical imaging of the Franz Walsingham portrait. Comparing underdrawing and paint application techniques will be a great help in trying to ascertain the link between the two paintings, if there is one.
The San Francisco portrait sitter is identified by name in an inscription visible under X-ray of the Catalina. This is a portrait of Frances Walsingham called the Lady Sydney with the surname of her first husband. Given the certainty of the San Francisco portrait sitter's identity and the almost replication of the face, it is plausible that the Parham portrait sitter is also Frances Walsingham, not Elizabeth Palmer, pending our further research. While this is currently the strongest lead we have, we will also be comparing and overlaying the faces of other Tudor portraits to try and understand if this resemblance is linked to the specific appearance of a sitter or a repeated facial pattern present in other female portraits of the time. You can see here 3 portraits with a similar facial design. The middle sitter is particularly similar, showing the same smile and nose shape reminiscent of the Parham portrait. However, we've yet to closely compare the face of the portrait of a lady with other Tudor portraits of the time. The possible identification of the sitter as Frances Walsingham puts us in a position to begin answering some of the questions about the Parham portrait. By looking at Frances' biographical details and by extension those of her various husbands, we're hoping to identify and explain some of the more noteworthy aspects of the painting. Frances Walsingham, or Frances Burke, the Countess of Clarencade as she's better known today, was born in 1567 and died in 1633. She was married 3 times to Philip Sidney, Robert Devereux and Richard Burke. If we subscribe to the current dating of the portrait for the mid-1580s, which is supported by Elise's research, and agree that the sitter is Frances Walsingham, she would have been younger than 19 years old when the Parham portrait was painted. By far the most interesting aspect of the painting from an art historical perspective is the inclusion of various symbols. These were identified in the label on the back of the panel and, as we've discussed, for example, the sitter holds a pansy, which, according to contemporaneous flower meanings and associations, implies thoughtfulness, expressed by the French origin of the word pensée. On her dress, we see a repeated motif of a column. The same design is reflected quite subtly in the details of her muff, although with more detail. On the muff, you can also make out a weaving design of flames, and within these flames, broken arrows. There are also a pair of small hands holding small arrows. The sitter's ruff is very detailed. In it, we can see quite a peculiar and repeated design of stars, flowers, snakes, and a tree log on its side, which is also known as a ragged staff. These designs are certainly hard to conceptualize, primarily because they don't make any logical sense if you try and consider them as patterns inherent to the design of the costume. There's no real pattern, the placement seems quite random, and it's unlikely that such intricate designs would appear this way if they were to be truly embroidered into a piece of material. This suggests that they may have been an invention of the artist rather than a reality of any real piece of clothing, or at least to some degree. We believe that these various symbols relate to the Tudor tradition of emblems and imprese. These were visual devices in the form of small illustrations, which when combined to convey significant and often poetic meaning about a person. They became popular in the 1570s and are most associated with Queen Elizabeth's accession day tilts or festivities including jousting and other pageantry, celebrating the accession of the Queen on the 17th of November. The emblems were disseminated by emblem books, often alongside mottos, which you can see here, and some of these books still exist. However, documentation of these emblematic devices was often ephemeral, and they remain hard to decipher. This enigmatic quality was part of the original design. To accurately interpret a person's emblem would be to have a robust understanding of the emblem tradition, their associated mottos, and the personal meaning of combining multiple designs. It's not unusual to find emblems and imprese in Tudor portraiture, nor in the embroidered design of clothes. The portrait of Queen Elizabeth, known as the Rainbow Portrait on the left here, combines many obscure motifs such as eyes, spears, snakes, and a rainbow. And a similar portrait of Frances Clinton, Lady Chandos, in the Woburn Abbey in Bedfordshire wears a dress embroidered with bees, with a design of bees and columns. It's more unusual how much detail is in the parent portrait, and it suggests a very particular and personal meaning on behalf of the sitter. So one of our research goals is to suggest a reason for these symbols' inclusion in the portrait, both in terms of how they relate to the sitter and why they are included in such an unusual way. While there is a precedent for Tudor portraiture for emblematic devices, which you can see here, the parent portrait is unusual because these designs seem to be unlikely to have actually been a feature of the sitter's ruff or dress. Coupled with what seems to have been an adjustment to the outfit due to the handling of paint, which Sakina will mention, we'd like to know if their inclusion is a later change and when this might have happened. And technical investigation will help us answer these questions.
So in conservation, we use ultraviolet light to examine paintings to better understand the materials like varnish, paint media, and pigments present. The intensity or color of the fluorescence emitted by the material can help us identify them or possibly gauge whether they have been on the surface for a long time. When looking at a portrait of a lady under UV light, we can see an even green fluorescence throughout. This type of fluorescence identifies the coating as a natural resin varnish, and since fluorescence intensifies as the varnish ages and yellows, it is possible to say that it's been there for quite some time. The darker patches we do see are retouching that are covered by the varnish, as these would usually appear a dark purple color under UV light. We can see a concentration of retouching along the right panel joint. I've put a raking light image so we can clearly see the panel joint that it is covering coming through the front. Those we do see, however, only represent the more recent campaign of retouching, since the thick and aged varnish obscures the other overpaint present on this work. For a painting of this age, it is not uncommon to have multiple campaigns of overpaint. Looking at the painting in ordinary light, the background has almost in its entirety been repainted. Large parts of the costume have also been covered. Many Tudor portraits do, however, have backgrounds that have been entirely repainted, as this was an easy task to do to cover losses or damaged paint, since they were usually painted in a single flat color. As we can see here in the micrograph, there's a dark green paint covering a more brownish background. So in between the paint cracks of the green, we see a more brownish reddish tone. Another photo micrograph taken from near the sitter's exposed hand shows dark green paint encroaching over the paint of the skirt towards the hand. While the retouching we do as conservators is usually applied to cover losses, the amount of overpaint present in portrait of a lady could indicate deliberate changes made to the painting to represent changes in tastes as time progressed, a change in the sitter's circumstances, like remarriage, or a change in the sitter's identity, making them historical additions rather than retouchings. The possibility of these being historical additions is currently backed by what we can see is being covered up. So near the rough's edge, it is possible to see an earlier design for a rough that extended further than what we currently see. The rough has been painted over in the background as well as where it overlaps in the clothing of a lady. So as an example, we put the rough of Franz Walsingham's portrait in the middle. So we're expecting maybe to see, after further technical imagery, a kind of a delicate lace detail going further into the background. Additionally, looking under the microscope, it is possible to see distinct lines painted in red running below the pearl motifs in the bodice. Initially, we believe that these could be part of an underdrawing or tonal drawing stage. However, upon further investigation and examination of the painting surface, these strong red lines are very particular to the bodice, the pearls on the bodice, as well as the pearls over the towers in the sleeves, but not in the necklace pearls. Further technical imaging such as X-radiography and infrared photography, as well as cross-section analysis, will help better understand the changes these additions have brought to the painting, as well as what they could mean for the sitter's identity.
So in summary, we're looking to answer a number of questions about this portrait. Firstly, can we justify identifying the sitter as Frances Walsingham instead of Elizabeth Palmer, or indeed are we looking at a different woman entirely? If the sitter is Frances Walsingham, what is the relationship between the Parham portrait and the San Francisco portrait? Is one traced from the other? Are they painted by the same hand or from different people in the same artistic circle, for example? And from their relationship, can we support the current dating to the mid-1580s?
We are also going to look at if we can identify a source for the emblems and the relationship to the sitter, and to what extent have the costume changed, and if so, what modifications have been brought to the Palm portrait and why.
Thank you. We wanted to thank Elise Edmund-Clifford at the Fine Art Museum of San Francisco for her continued help and generosity, as well as all other scholars who have helped us with their time and expertise, and of course Parham House for their collaboration moving forward. So, thank you.
Are there any questions? Yes.
Is the panel size of the painting you're currently examining similar to the one in San Francisco?
I think ours, I have to look again, I think ours might be slightly bigger than their painting.
And is there any correlation between the other panels you've looked at?
We haven't looked so far yet into other panels. We're just currently doing the technical imaging of the panel, but we're really going to present that further in our next presentation. More comparisons.
So the designs that you found, so the sort of tower-looking or telescope designs, did you find those in the sort of booklets with the symbols, or could they be in there possibly?
I mean, theoretically, yes, they could, and it would be great if we could find direct kind of correlations to them. I guess the issue with those emblematic devices, as I kind of said, is that they were ephemeral and also just kind of intensely poetic in the way that they were used in design. So the emblem books that I have looked at, you can find kind of similar designs, especially in the use of like arrows and hands and swords, but I haven't found direct kind of correlations to what our sitter is wearing yet. I'm hoping to. Yeah.
I don't know if you've looked at all at the New Year's gifts to Queen Elizabeth from her subjects, and that's really, have you looked at those?
I think I know what you're referring to.
And that's really interesting with regard to how fantastical items of costume could sometimes be. So, I mean, I get what you're saying, that it might be artistic license, some of that decoration in the rough, but actually when you read those gifts that were given to Elizabeth I, some of those costumes did have weird, wonderful stuff either stained onto them or actually embroidered on. So it could have been a real item.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only reason that we think that the ruff in particular might not have been painted from sight is just because of kind of details in the way it looks, basically. It's quite an unusual pattern, which is why we kind of think that it might have been maybe an elaboration on something that existed.
There's no repeat in the individual cones, let's say. If there's a snake, sometimes there's snake, then tree stump, and then snake, and then tree stump, snake, but then there's some that don't have a snake in them between the tree stump. So it's very like, it's not a repeated pattern really, it's just they put designs throughout randomly. Yes?
Since you have mentioned that you've received information from the museum, from Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, does that painting have underdrawing or this painting have underdrawing?
We've looked at it quickly. I wanted to reveal this in like the next presentation. keep some stuff secret for now, so people come back. I can confirm it's in May. So after we've done all our research, I can confirm there's some underdrawing. If there are no further questions, you can always come to us after the presentation to ask us anything. We'd like to introduce Grace and Sarah and their painting of Mary Queen of Scots.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for attending our presentation today. We are both very excited to share our initial research questions with you. My name is Sarah Bergenborough and I'm in the MA History of Art program.
And I'm Grace Story and I'm in my second year doing the MA Conservation of Easel Paintings course.
So just to give a quick outline of what we're trying to present today, we're going to give an introduction to the painting and answer a little bit of questions about provenance. We're also going to give a little bit of our historical context and talk a little bit about our research questions and also provide a little bit of what we've done for technical analysis so far, in addition to what we're thinking about for our next steps. Awesome. So to start, we were presented this particular portrait of Mary Queen of Scots back in November 2023. The painting has no recorded artist or date. It's oil on panel, and we received the painting from the Royal Collection Trust, particularly the Holyrood House Palace. In December, we met with the RCT's curator, and she provided a wealth of information and archival documents that outlined the painting's initial appearances in catalogs and public exhibitions throughout the late 19th century. The RCT catalogs show that the painting was acquired by Prince Albert on July 1st, 1845, and was initially displayed at Barton Manor, which is next to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. The painting appears in the 1876 Osborne House inventory, and RCT records show that the painting was sent to Buckingham Palace in 1902 and to Windsor Castle in 1926.
So it is possible, and the provenance of the painting can be sort of traced through a variety of labels on the verso here. For example, the acquisition by Queen Victoria and Albert in 1845 can be seen in Albert's personal brand, along with the crowned VR insignia at the bottom there. The location can also be deduced from this stamp, which places the painting in that Osborne inventory, as mentioned before, referencing Osborne House, but also Barton Farm next door. Similarly, the move to Buckingham Palace in 1902 can be seen in this label here, which is just a fragment, but it is possible to deduce, it most likely says from, and then underneath the end of Osborne, and then the date 1902. And the transfer from Buckingham Palace to Windsor Castle there is stated on the label there, from Buckingham Palace, and the date, and then the Windsor Castle inventory list underneath.
So, additional information provided by the RCT's curator shows that the painting was on display in 1889 at an exhibition in London at the Royal House of Stewart at the New Gallery on Regent Street. And the exhibition's catalog does not include a photograph of the painting, but it does clearly state that it was lent from Osborne House and describes the painting's chair covered in red velvet and golden fleur-de-lis, which allows us to confirm that that is the painting that we have in our possession now. Next to it, George Shorff has seen the painting in 1888, provided a very detailed description of the painting with the chair's bright, mellow crimson color, patterned with a golden yellow fleur-de-lis. And then on the right comes from a 1903 publication, which did include a photograph of our painting, While the publication focuses on whether a variety of portraits contain a true likeness of Mary Stuart, it refers to our painting as a supposed portrait of Mary Stuart. But all three of these instances, the 1889 catalog, the 1888 article, and the 1903 publication, all refer to our painting similarities to an 18th century drawing from Francois Roger Giganier's collection, which is on the left here. Gagnières was a collector and tutor to the sons of the Grand Dauphin, and a French artist, Louise Baudin, had completed the drawing for him after a larger portrait in Gagnières' collection. The drawing's caption states, copied from her original portrait, which is in one of the galleries of Monsieur de Gagnières in his house in Paris. The drawing is now held in the French National Library, and it will now be referred to as the BNF drawing. The BNF's notes state that according to a 1711 inventory, there were 3 paintings that may have served as models for the drawing. Sorry. Of the 3, 2 were busts, and the third belonged to a series of full-length portraits, which is most likely the source for the drawing. Since our painting is not the full-length portrait that once belonged to Gagnières, it would be helpful for the Royal Collection Trust and for us to see if a technical study can help place our portrait. Essentially, it would be very useful to determine if the RCT's portrait painting of Mary Queen of Scots was done before or after this drawing. I am also interested in how the portrait is used throughout the 18th and 19th centuries as a memorialization of Mary Queen of Scots. The RCT curator had also shared some additional information about where versions of the BNF drawing were published and where copies of the BNF drawing can be found in the United States and in the United Kingdom. On the right, we can see that the BNF drawing was the source material for an engraving and a publication from 1729 to 1733. And on the left, we can see that the BNF drawing was used for an engraving and another publication of Iconographica Scotia, or Illustrious Persons of Scotland, engraved from the most authentic paintings with short biographical notices, which was sold in 1797 in Edinburgh, London, and York. And currently a digitized version is available online, and I'll be looking through it for a little bit more information. These 2 popular publications may have contributed to the popularity of this particular styling of Mary Queen of Scots that we see in our painting, and may have influenced the creation of our painting as a copy of the BNF drawing. However, if the technical analysis revealed that the painting was created during the 18th century, I would like to further explore the previous 2 publications. But on this slide, I want to talk about the possibility of, if our painting was created during the 19th century, what are some other source material that I would be interested in looking at? With a such distinct version of Mary Queen of Scots, with her hand resting on a red chair adorned with fleur-de-lis, I would like to also see how this impacted Victorian England's perceptions of Mary Queen of Scots. On the left, there's an illustration from a book entitled Fancy Dress Described, or What to Wear to Fancy Dress Balls. The illustration shows 2 costumes, one of Mary Queen of Scots and one of Mary Stuart, as 2 distinct depictions of the woman. The book was sold by Debden and Freebodies, which has also sold the materials, clothing, and props to complete the costume. Although this illustration comes quite late in the 18th century, I'd like to explore the cultural memorialization of Mary Queen of Scots as a costume for Victorian-era woman. On the right, there's a photograph of Princess Alexandra as Mary Queen of Scots in 1887, which reflects the Victorian-era practice of dressing up as Mary Queen of Scots and having your photo taken at a photography studio. I would like to explore how our portrait may have influenced these staged self-representations. Particularly, did the BNF drawing or our painting influence the inclusion of a chair in these studio photographs? Did our painting influence the costume of Mary Queen of Scots that would have been used for fancy balls? These are some of my initial research questions. When it comes to fancy dress costumes from the 19th century, we often rely on written information such as newspaper reports and publications, and on visual materials such as photographs of the participants. I hope to use these sources to further explore our painting's possible connections with fancy dress costumes for a Victorian-era woman.
So returning to that initial sort of research question that we had on the relationship between this painting and the Louis Baudin drawing, any discussion of influence does necessitate the question of which painting or drawing came first, and this is where methods of visual and technical analysis can be exceedingly useful. So what is very interesting is this is a panel painting. It's a single panel. It's a single board of oak. and because it's a panel, it presented the opportunity for dendrochronology to be used as a means of dating the wood. In this case, dendrochronological analysis had already been conducted when we received this painting. So for those of you who are maybe less familiar, dendrochronological analysis is the process whereby different width of the tree rings present in the panel can be measured and analysed. For as the tree grows, fluctuations in the climate every year result in a specific pattern of different tree ring widths, which can be compared to known sets of reference data, and through this comparison the timber can be very precisely located and dated. So in this case, the panel was examined by Ian Tyers in February of last year, and the report was kindly supplied to us by the Royal Collection. The panel was found to match Southern German reference data, and terminus post quem, or earliest possible date for the panel, of 1617 was established. And this is significantly earlier than we had expected for the panel, as hitherto it had been believed to be 19th century. So this has had very significant implications for our research, as if the painting was found to be produced quite soon after the panel may have been cut, it is entirely possible that this painting could have predated the Boudin illustration instead. So through reading this report, it really focused the research that we now want to conduct into trying to answer as far as possible when exactly the present composition was painted. So when the painting initially entered the Courtauld Conservation Studio, it was covered in a considerable layer of surface dirt, which did not only obscure the finer details of the paint application, but also would potentially hinder the efficacy of various technical analysis methods, which could be then used to paint a better picture of the painting. So as a result, even though the portrait had only initially entered the department for examination, the Royal Collection very kindly gave me permission to surface clean the painting, which I conducted using saliva applied mechanically with cotton swabs before clearing in the same manner with deionized water. This treatment really did very effectively remove a large majority of the surface dirt and has allowed a much clearer analysis to be conducted. It's especially evident under the microscope, which, as you can see, the surface dirt did obscure the painting, although, as is also apparent, the surface is still partially obscured by a very crazed varnish which has cracked and, especially in the darker passages of paint, has caused light scattering to somewhat disrupt the image still. We began analysis after the cleaning, looking under the microscope, which revealed that the paint layers have in general been very thinly applied with semi-transparent glazes very rich in binding media applied either directly onto the ground or above more opaque passages of paint, in order to create richer effects with more depth and luminosity. This is especially evident in the jewel here, which is in Mary's hatband, where this sort of cherry red transparent layer appears to have been applied over a sort of more opaque orangey layer beneath, and then finished with a semi-transparent white highlight, which has been added in what appears to be the final stages of painting, and that is quite common throughout the whole of the composition. It's fairly similar in the detail of the hat feather there as well. The white highlights do appear to be added last and over the green background as well. This kind of glazing technique has been present from the beginnings of oil painting, from Van Eyck's, and continued to be a popular technique well into the 19th century, and therefore throughout the time when this panel may have reasonably been painted. The technique alone then doesn't necessarily narrow down a time frame for the painting, but what has very significantly changed throughout this period are the materials used to create the effect. So artist palettes are constantly evolving over time with the development of new pigments. So research and technical analysis into the pigments can be a really useful tool to identify when certain passages of paint are likely to have been applied. The 19th century especially saw considerable advancements in pigment production, with lots of new pigments synthesized and introduced, especially various blues and greens. I've just put some examples of ones that were introduced on board there. So this is a really key area which we are going to pursue a lot further, using methods of inorganic chemical analysis to try and identify if any of the pigments have been used in the paint layers, which would present a very strong case that the painting, or certainly that particular layer or passage of paint, must have been added in the 19th century and would therefore post-date the Boudin illustration. In addition to changes in pigments, throughout centuries, the binding media used to achieve these glazes was also constantly changing, incorporating different additives such as varnish, turpentine, wax, or metal oxides in various different amounts. This change and the desire to find a suitable binding media to achieve these glaze effects is especially evident again in the 18th and the 19th century, when it's reflected through the production of commercial binding media such as McGilp and Robertson's medium, which contained mastic and copal varnishes along with black oil. This sort of constant experimentation using different binding media did subsequently lead to several issues in the formation of drying cracks or ductile cracks, like those which are especially evident in this portrait, partially covered in this case by a later campaign of retouching to try and tone them into the background. So this is another potential avenue which we can look into using various methods of organic technical analysis to see if they could be used to help identify some of the components in the binding media, possibly shedding some light on both the painting process and the causes of ductile cracking, as well as potentially providing additional evidence that could contribute towards a dating of the painting. So our next steps in this case really do centre around establishing the materials and techniques used to create the painting through various methods of both organic and inorganic technical analysis, and using what's known about the history of these materials to contribute to a proposed date of the painting campaign. If a date then can indeed be established for the paint layers, we can consider the further implications that it might have for the panel, including investigating its possible life prior to the present paint campaign, and the implications such a date would have for the relationship between this painting and that Boudin illustration. So, thank you very much for listening. Yes?
Just a question about the crackler. Is that the shine double patches, or is that crackler across the whole of the surface, or is it kind of localized?
I think certainly there's different sort of phenomena in different areas. The varnish is cracked almost throughout, but it is very especially evident in the darker passages of paint. You can sort of see it almost does appear lighter and it's more concentrated. So it's possibly got something to do with how the different pigments sort of interact with that varnish layer on the top. Yeah.
I was wondering about the chair and whether, and like why is it particularly symbolic of Mary Queen of Scots or anything?
So based on the research that I've conducted so far, we don't see that chair very often in portraits of Mary Queen of Scots. In this particular portrait, it's the fleur-de-lis that's kind of implicating that this painting may have been painted in France, and that this is kind of emphasizing her connection to France or her time in France. So the chair is very unique, which is what is the main iconographic details that relates it to the Boudin drawing. Yeah. So because of that drawing having a blue chair instead of a red chair, it's that conversation of which one came first.
Have you thought about the dimension of the painting? That seems to be peculiarly small. Is that correct? Is it a very tiny?
Yes, it is a very small painting, and that is certainly interesting. It's one of the things that where it's a big implication for the date of the painting, since the panel is from so much earlier. If the painting itself does seem to date from much later, we could look into the possible life of the panel beforehand and whether it might have been cut down from a bigger composition before, or whether the wood might have been repurposed from something else. So it's entirely possible it's been cut down from something and then repurposed.
Just following on from that, is it a similar size to the drawing?
I don't know. I don't think we know the dimensions of the drawing.
Yes, so the BNF website has not published the dimensions, so we have to reach out to them to confirm if it's exact overlay or if one is smaller than the other.
Just as a suggestion, it was common practice among the courts of Europe in the 17th century to circulate dynastic portraits in small formats. So it seems to me impossible that this is the original prototype of this design that would have been large, like size, most likely. So it seems entirely possible that it's a 17th century. It was very common to circulate small dynastic portraits among the courts of Europe. And Germany was very kind of keen on those. In Innsbruck at Amherst Schloss, there is an enormous collection of these. So they're normally not full-size. I mean, like,
it's really interesting. Thank you. If there are no further questions, then we can introduce our final pair for their presentation.
Hello, I'm Christina, and I'm the conservator in this pair, working with Anna Maria, who's on the MA in Curating. You're looking at the portrait of Stephanie Pilkington, dated to 1919 and signed EK in the lower right. The sitter's grandchildren brought the painting to the department for research as well as conservation treatment. By combining the two disciplines of technical and aesthetic analysis, this project hopes to elucidate some of the main questions we have about this exciting portrait and the enigmatic figure it depicts. In this presentation, we'll be introducing you to the painting and to our main part of inquiry. The hope is to have some answers to these ready for you by the next lecture in May. So we've identified three main angles which we'll be approaching the painting from. We'll both be exploring questions which fall under these. By the immediate artistic context, we mean the physical history of the painting, the relationship between the sitter and the artist at the time it's created. In the wider artistic context, if we cannot assign EK to a particular artist, can we trace influences or affiliation with any contemporary artistic groups by comparative research? Thirdly, the location, the geographical context, can we tell anything of the region in which the painting was created from either the materials used or the scenery it features?
So now we just want to get started a little bit with the personal context. So Stephanie Mary Pilkington was part of the Pilkington family, known for its glass manufacturing company. Learning about her biography through her granddaughter showed us that she led an interesting life, and this portrait captures an important period of it, as well as reflects a socio-political turning point in Germany's history. Stephanie was born on August 16, 1889 in Lancashire, UK. At an unknown date, she moved from the UK to Germany, where she married Friedrich Fritz Behrendt, a German Jewish man, on May 30th, 1914. He was a composer and a musician, and his first job was as a conductor in Freiburg, and he later worked as the Kapellmeister in Münster and Osnabrück. He was a composer. Oh, yes, sorry. Did we skip one? Okay. Presumably, Stephanie stayed in Freiburg until 1920. The couple had their son, Thomas, on November 30th, 1921, in Kaiserslautern, Germany, 2 years after this portrait was painted. After Fritz was sacked due to tensions with the Gestapo, the couple moved around Germany. The couple divorced, and at some point, her granddaughters believe 1926, Stephanie moved back to the UK with her son, escaping anti-Semitism. She was Anglican, but her ex-husband and son were not, causing warranted anxiety about persecution. And in 1940, a few years post-divorce, as seen in this notice on the next slide, we see how Stephanie changed her and her son's surname to her maiden name. Okay, next. Thank you. So Germany, specifically the mountainous forest regions, clearly meant a lot to Stephanie. She continued receiving postcards with the scenery from friends while she was back in the UK. The family has albums full of photographs taken of Stephanie and her friends on holidays in the Black Forest near Freiburg, amongst other places. The photographs located here bear strong resemblances with the scenery in the painting, and her family emphasizes that, unfortunately, due to the lack of photographs when she moved back to the UK, her bright social life and relationships took a hit in the wake of the war. So photographs of Stephanie, often posed by herself or with other women, make it clear that the artist captured her well. The portrait accurately captures her stern expression, her long hair tied in a low bun, and her slight androgyny. Her granddaughters maintain that images of Stephanie on vacation with other women indicate that she was a lesbian, and believe that she mixed with artistic groups. So this information highlights really interesting avenues of social research about women's changing roles during the Weimar Republic and the soon-to-come oppressive context of Nazi Germany.
So we've started to build a story of the painting's physical history just through superficial visual examination. We can tell from the way that the paint pools around the current tacks in the lower margin, around here, that they were there before the painting began. Differently shaped and spaced holes around the other tacking margins likely show that individual sides have been retensioned. We can tell that the frames were authentic from the corresponding traces of paint on the inner rebate, you can see in these images, which show the painting dry was fitted in it. Ultraviolet light excites a greenish-blue fluorescence, which is characteristic of natural resin, and we seem to have a thin layer of this varnish applied here. You can tell that the varnish was applied whilst the painting was framed, because the border of varnish, in this lower right image, sits within the sight size of the frame. We can also say from the uneven application and the correspondence with the brushstrokes, the varnish in some places, the artist likely applied it as a protective and saturating measure, perhaps before exhibition. Condition checking also informs us of the painting's physical history. Stephanie took the portrait with her around Germany and back with her to the UK, so we can see that the painting is well travelled and has been through lots of different unmonitored environments. The longer, straggly threads around the tear in the sitter's eyebrow show that this was likely created by slow pressure against another object in storage. There aren't any previous records of cleaning, so we can suppose that the different sorts of particulate surface dirt currently dulling some of the relationships between colours have come from different parts of the painting's life. Some, like in the skies, you can see from this aqueous cleaning test in the yellow, show up as darker, whereas there's a yellow crystalline material in the green areas, which can either be the result of migrating mobile components within the paint layer or from an external source like tobacco tar. We can also see something of the order in which the painting was created. You can see from the lower tacking margin a thin blue underlayer beneath the figure, which originally extended further towards the right. This suggests that drawing Stephanie's elbow in so that her arm crosses her chest was the later decision made by the artist. Further technical analysis could build on some of these observations which I've just shared with you. Infrared reflectography might show whether the artist began with underdrawing in carbon-containing material, how deliberative they were, and whether there were any further compositional changes. Similarly, X-radiography can help detect some of the changes by identifying underlayers made in X-ray dense materials such as lead white. We could even begin to characterise the different sorts of particulate dirt using organic analytical techniques. All of these things might help to flesh out the painting's physical history, compounding Anna Maria's research. So from all these observations and contextual information, we've identified a few key aspects of the painting's immediate artistic context, which we'd like to look into further. These include the relationship between the sitter and the artist, the working process of the artist, and the physical history of the painting as it made its way from Germany to the UK.
So now we'll kind of move on to the wider artistic context. So regarding artistic groups and inspiration, it's clear that the artist was in dialogue with different influences to produce this type of portrait. Stylistically, the colorful palette finds common ground with works by early 20th century German expressionists and groups such as De Broca and the Blaureiter, who manipulated form and color. And thematically, the artist pulls from their subject matter, like imaginative landscapes and expressive portraiture. The usage of color is very deliberate in our painting, so we could imagine the artist could have been influenced by the work of early Bauhaus members like Johannes Eden, who was working on changing color theory and the color wheel around the time our painting was completed. And at this point, it is too early to specifically associate or assign the artist to any larger movement or smaller subgroup within the country, but nevertheless, it's still clear that the artist was aware of the broader stylistic and formal trends in painting at the time it made a conscientious effort to experiment with these. And here we just have more examples, kind of landscape in the genre. And in terms of artist attribution and the portrait type, we think that EK might be a female painter, given Stephanie's array of female friends that we know from our conversation with the family and their photographs. Yes, we think it may be plausible to suggest that EK might have been a female painter. And To find any overlap, we researched the Allgemeines Kunster lexicon for any artists with EK initials recorded by 1922, and it's only a start, and this is only an excerpt of some of the names, but the artists may have not been recorded in the lexicon, even more so since they could have been a woman. And interestingly, we did discover some parallels in genre and pose from the teacher of one female painter called Eva Knopf. And it made me wonder whether this pose with, you know, the craned elbow, the cigarette in hand, and sitting at the same angle and orientation, whether this was a common way to instruct sitters. But although I don't believe Eva was the artist, given her signature and other paintings differs from ours, it's still worth considering whether this was a common type of portraiture, given the similarities. And moreover, given the Bavarian-seeming background that we have in the painting, we're wondering whether the artist could have maybe attended the Royal Bavarian Academy of Fine Arts. Big names like Joseph Albers began attending the school in 1919, and then he later moved to Weimar in 1920 after the Bauhaus was founded. And then our next portion, so portraiture of the period also reflected how traditional notions of gender and sexuality were being challenged. Painters and photographers frequently took as their subject the newly emancipated German woman dubbed the New Woman, a fashionable figure often associated with lesbianism and androgyny who sported bobbed hair and often wore traditionally masculine attire, including suits and monocles. And we see Stephanie sporting these styles, so it's super interesting for us to explore the deep social implications of her choices. So the mass advent of the Bubikopf, an umbrella term for women's short haircuts that could range in style from a chin-length pageboy bob to a tightly cropped Eden, was undoubtedly the most controversial fashion phenomenon in interwar Germany. It was embraced by millions of German women from all class backgrounds as a sign of their modernity and fashion sense and widely touted for its practicality. This hairstyle was the subject of countless articles, cartoons, poems, and images in contemporary media that we see above. More than any other style, it cut to the heart of social and cultural anxieties concerning the masculinization of women, providing commentators and readers alike with a discursive space in which to negotiate changing relations between women and men. And such criticisms highlight both the central problem and main attraction of the hairstyle, its associations with gender ambiguity and transgression, and women's appearances provided a familiar and comprehensible forum around which much larger anxieties about social, cultural, and demographic changes coalesced. And commentators used their criticisms of this style to restore a sense of control and stability in at least one area of rapidly changing society. Journalists from across the media spectrum explicitly linked women's visual masculinization to the industrialization and modernization of German society, which is part and parcel of which was a shift towards increasing gender equality. So next to this hairstyle, the tuxedo or the formal dinner suit, known in German as the smoking, and one of the most obvious borrowings for men's tailoring, was amongst the most prominent visual signs of the masculinization of women in Weimar media coverage, and was central to the wardrobe of the cosmopolitan Gaston. So at the time, however, we must acknowledge the queer erotic fascination that continued to surround this figure in both heterosexual and homosexual contexts, even to the final years of the Republic.
So I'm hoping to support Anna Maria's research into the wider artistic context using material evidence. This will involve comparative technical analysis. We can tell that the canvas is likely to be linen, and from the way that the white priming extends to the edges, it's likely to be cut from a commercially primed roll. Cross-sectional analysis will help to confirm whether we're seeing just this one layer of priming, or whether it's been modified in some way by the artist for reasons of colour or absorbency. The raking light image you see here on the left gives some sense of the surface topography. The artist clearly varies their paint application a lot, but the thick, heavier impasto is concentrated in areas of scenery and architecture. The paint is so heavily and unevenly spread that it seems to be buffing the canvas, as you can see from these vertical distortions. The size and uniformity of pigment particles when viewed under the microscope suggests the presence of synthetically made pigments. Tube paint was commonly used by 1919, and details in the green suggest that the paint could have been squeezed directly onto the canvas and then brushed out. The artist applied many different contrasting colours working wet on wet, yet still skillfully managed to keep, oh, something's gone red, is that? Oh, sorry. Yet still skillfully managed to keep the colours fresh and avoid them muddying each other. Bold colours were available and popular amongst artists across Germany, as Anna Maria has pointed out, and there were lots of developments in paint technology in the early 20th century, many of which were happening in Germany. Munich, which is near Freiburg and Breisgau, where Stephanie is captured in various photos where she resembles this portrait, was a nucleus for German expressionists and theorists interested in how painters could achieve good and long-lasting effects with modern materials. For example, and excuse the literal translation, the German Society for the Promotion of Rational Painting Techniques was established in Munich in 1886. We can identify pigments and binding media in this painting using a combination of different sorts of spectroscopy. Methods of inorganic analysis include X-ray fluorescence, or XRF, which can identify the presence of a range of elements directly on the paint surface. Energy dispersive X-ray analysis and scanning electron microscopy, SEM, can be used together to identify materials within a cross-section. We can characterize the binding media, medium used, and other methods of spectroscopy which are suitable for organic materials. By comparing our results with technical studies on other artists and using research into naturally aged samples of contemporary materials, we can support our contextualization of this artist amongst 20th century expressionist artists who might have been active in Germany around the same time. So this sort of analysis could also benefit conservation treatment. The delamination of paint is concentrated in these thin-looking passages of blue and green highlighted on the image. There's a cupping going on in the blue and the flaking or alligatoring happening in the light green areas, which has resulted in losses. This same phenomenon looks like it's starting to occur in the darker green areas to the far left. Since these photomicros were taken, most of the paint's been consolidated and looks a little less vulnerable. Close analysis of the painting materials and the layer structure could also help locate the factors contributing to the delamination. Is this an inherent and persistent problem to do with incompatible media? Could some sort of a backing material added to the underlying canvas help buffer the effects of changing humidity, which are likely related to these mechanical issues? So within the remit of the wider artistic context, we've identified a few key areas of interest. The artist's identity, whether we can see stylistic or material affiliations to contemporary German expressionists. We're also interested in gender ideology expressed through fashion trends in the era of the Weimar Republic.
Great, so now we'll move on to location and geography. So around 1919, as we mentioned, many artistic groups operated around Germany, and although we know that Stephanie was most likely living in Freiburg at the time, given her access to resources and the photographs we have of her traveling around the country, it's highly possible to say that she may have traveled elsewhere around the country and returned home with this painting. We can also see from the family photographs that whoever was behind the camera, here's family photographs of the mountains, that whoever was behind the camera, whether it was Stephanie or a friend, they found the architectural form of the spire interesting enough to photograph, considering photography was such a laborious process back then. So architecturally speaking, the tower spire was a typical visual element of artist vocabulary at the time and a recognizable element of German townscapes. So for example, the spire is the central motif in Lionel Feininger's 1919 cathedral woodcut for the Bauhaus Manifesto. The cathedral reflects the aura of medievalism that pervaded the initial phase of the Bauhaus. So this may have been an artistic preoccupation our artists considered by including this recognizable architecture. And moreover, German Gothic cathedrals are perhaps most notable for their tall towers and spires, especially in the Rhineland. They symbolize the heavenly aspirations of church builders and offered a visual spectacle of extreme height. And in these Rhinish workshops, the up-to-date French rayonnant ideas about the skeletonization of form were for the first time brought to life through creating the first spires with open-work pyramids. So it's fascinating to see this abstract indication of this architectural typology in our painting spire. So here are more of those family images that show the, landscapes and churches, etc. And
here, we can also note the rolling hills in the background of our painting, and perhaps it was Germany's Black Forest, and the snow-capped mountain in the back of our painting could perhaps also allude to the Bavarian Alps. And here we have kind of a map of Expressionist Germany in 1920. Again, as we mentioned earlier, at this point it's really hard to know where to ascribe the artist, but it's clear that there were a lot of sort of a nexus kind of around all over the country, and artists really operating in groups everywhere. So a lot of possibilities at this point. So now we're kind of at our conclusion. So in summary, we've laid out our key questions under 3 broad categories, as well as the sources and methods we'll be using to explore them. And we hope to learn more about the immediate context in which the painting was created through its social and physical history, as well as possible artistic attributions. We're interested in exploring the wider artistic context of the painting through fashion and gender. Aesthetic and material analysis will also help in narrowing down where the portrait might have been painted, and we're excited to share with you where the research takes us. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the Pilkington family for providing us all these amazing photographs, and yeah. If anybody has questions? You first.
You have an enormous number of interesting photographs, you say, which is supplied by the family. To what extent have you been able to look at the archives directly and choose comparators, or are you working with the family choosing the comparators?
The inspirations was us kind of deducing from our painting, but then the photographs, we went to their house and they opened boxes of images and we went through them and just went through the whole family history. So it was a really nice collaborative moment, family, yeah.
So what do you think is the closest date for that painting then, having seen the photos of her at different ages?
Oh, it's dated to 1919.
1919.
Just in the bottom right corner you can see EK.19, which I mean could be an age, but that's unlikely, it's probably a date.
Yeah.
This was my question. Where is the signature? I can't see it.
This little corner.
Did you have
Try and get a more zoomed in image.
It shows it a little bit more.
Yeah. Down here.
So, you looked at a lot of steeples.
Sorry?
You looked at a lot of steeples.
Yes.
Do you think that's Freiburg, or what do you think?
I mean, I was thinking the open sort of lattice, etc., in the spire or steeple could be, but it's just, I don't want to specifically say it is because there's no way of me really knowing, but it is, I mean, eerily similar. I have an image of I have them side by side in this painting from, and this was, when this painted, I think it was a 19th century painting, so I mean they're so similar, and with the mountains in the back, but again it's kind of, I don't want to say definitively because there's no way I can actually know that at this point.
Do you think the portrait was done from life or from a photo?
So that's a question that we've been also asking ourselves, just given the amount of photographs that we have of her and how comfortable she is behind the camera. It's...
I think also from a sort of more technical perspective, if we see evidence of an undeliberative underdrawing, it's more likely that this has been sort of staged, whereas we're seeing sort of evidence of compositional changes and things. I think we'll have to wait and see what the underlay is suggesting.
There's nothing else. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for coming, and I hope that you'll come to the May 24th Friday It might be in here again, but it might be downstairs to check, to see the culmination of their research, and you'll answer questions that you've asked already, and they'll probably tell us more things. So thanks so much. And thank you to Piers for amazing introductory presentations. It was so great to listen to you. Thank you.